Morning, everyone. My name is Chris Rulin. I'm the chair of the land use practice at Lord Shirley and Brewer, and I'd like to welcome you to today's seminar. We're extremely pleased to bring together several leaders in the biotech industry this morning for what we're sure will be an informative and timely update on the state of the industry in the county. As you may know, Lord Shirley is a full-service law firm, which means not only can we handle your land use and real estate needs, but we can also help with your taxes, your employment issues, closing a business loan, and many other matters. With respect to land use, we have 14 land use attorneys who represent national, regional, and local clients in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, as well as in other Maryland jurisdictions. As for real estate, we have 10 transactional attorneys who work with developers, property owners, investors, and institutional clients throughout Maryland, DC, and Virginia. Before we get to the program, I'd like to mention we have been working hard to bring useful content and resources to our website through the pandemic. And you can feel free to go to lordshirley.com where you'll find our zoned in land use blog among other relevant articles and updates. And now I'd like to introduce my partner and fellow land use attorney, Stacy Silver, who will be moderating today's event.
Thanks, Chris. And before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. The program today is being recorded and we will be sharing it with you as well for your use. And now onto the main event. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a wonderful group of people who are here from the real estate industry, from the biotech industry, and all other segments that support these two industries. And I also wanted to particularly thank our land use group, but in particular our planning committee, including Patrick O'Neill, Chris Rulin, Vince Biazzi, Marissa Rose, and of course, Scott Pacheco, who made this all come together. So before we get started in introducing all the panelists, I wanted to just kind of let you know what we typically do when we're thinking about a program is we banter around different topics, and the biotech life sciences topic just kept rising to the top. And I think it's evident in terms of how many folks have come today. And we have an excellent group of folks that are here with us that will be digging into some of these issues. We're going to try to stop at around 9:45 or so. We want to hear your comments. And so we ask that during this program, if you do have any comments, that you can feel free to add them into the chat feature. So what we're going to do is I'm going to first introduce Brad Stewart. Brad is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. And Brad's going to provide some background with regards to the state of the market in Montgomery County. We are so lucky to have Brad as a resource here. He is a seasoned CEO. He's invested his career in starting and building global life sciences companies and leading the global life sciences strategies practices for major consulting firms. He currently serves as board chair for Maryland Life Sciences and is a board chair, vice chair of the Maryland Tech Council. So I'm going to turn it over to Brad for a few moments, who's going to give us some background.
Thanks, Stacy. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone who's watching, and all the rest of the panelists who are here with us. So we're all familiar with the life sciences community here in Montgomery County. It's one of the shining spots of our economy. As most of you know, it's the fourth largest life sciences area in the United States. With that, I've been here for 25 years and have been a huge proponent and advocate of trying to help grow the life sciences economy, not only here in Montgomery County, but in the state of Maryland. There are a couple of interesting things that I think people already know or are familiar with. Obviously, we have the Food and Drug Administration here. We additionally have the National Institutes of Health here, and those are successful and huge anchors which help us. But I don't think people realize that in the state of Maryland, we also have the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is the largest payer for healthcare services in the entire world. So there's a great concentration of really the epicenter of healthcare happening right here. For us, it's always a matter of how do we compete on a global scale, because that's really the scale we're competing on, and how do we compete on a national scale, which is also one of those challenges. For me, since I've been here at MCDC, one of the things we've really tried to do is focus on our strengths. And so that's what I thought I'd tell you a little bit about, because that's where I think there's the greatest opportunity for us to succeed on that global scale and global marketplace. Maryland and Montgomery County are one of the largest centers for cell and gene therapy in the world. A lot of that original research originated out of the National Institutes of Health, and you have two panelists here who are working in those fields today. That's clearly an area we have the opportunity to grow. and we're people who are focused, we can help to succeed. Additionally, we have a huge number of vaccine development companies that are here. Even prior to the pandemic, about 20% of all the key opinion leaders in the world in vaccine development were here in Maryland. And then the other part of that is advanced biomanufacturing. So we have a lot of manufacturers here in the state of Maryland and Montgomery County who are making incredibly complex therapies, including cell and gene therapies. And right here next to us in Urbana is Kite, who has just built the largest cell therapy manufacturing facility in the world. So I think those are the things we can really help to grow on and probably be a good part of the discussion.
Thank you, Brad. And I do look forward to drawing more upon some of that background. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists, and I'm going to start with Matt Brady. Matt is the Principal and Senior VP at Shear Partners. He's been cultivating his expertise in scientific facilities since 2003, and he's a foremost authority on identifying, evaluating, and negotiating lab space in the Mid-Atlantic region, and his expertise in other areas as well. Matt has a unique understanding that allows him to match scientific processes to real estate solutions. And we'll talk about that today because that expertise is really essential to making these deals work. Our next panelist is Murat Kalioli, who is the president and CEO of Cartesian Therapeutics. Cartesian is a fascinating company. I've spent some time digging into Murat's company, and it consists of an integrated team of scientists committed to delivering the safest, most effective RNA cell therapies to patients with unmet medical needs. Previously, Murat was co-founder and CEO of Topokine, which he led from concept to late-stage clinical trials, followed by a successful sale to Allergan. Murat is a board-certified ophthalmologist who completed his residency and research fellowship at Harvard. He received his MD, PhD in immunology at the University of Wisconsin at Madison and his MBA from MIT. Next, we have Anthony Saleh. Anthony is the CEO of Miracule, an early-stage biotech company developing RNA-based therapeutics. And a little secret is that Anthony and Murat know each other in multiple ways, including having offices in the same building. Anthony is a biotech entrepreneur who has founded and served in a variety of roles in several startup companies where he's led technology diligence and product development efforts. And he's participated in funding raises for 2 companies and performed scouting efforts for Roche and MedImmune, leading to several academic collaborations. And I'm hoping Anthony will talk a little bit also about how his company has come from NIH and other opportunities for other companies. So why don't we just jump right in? And I'd like to start with you, Murat, and Anthony. Our audience includes many landowners, developers, et cetera. And I think they all would be really interested in why you chose to locate your companies in Montgomery County and what factors will keep you here. So why don't we start with you, Murat?
Thank you, Stacy. Thanks everyone for joining today. It's really is a privilege to be building a biotech company within Montgomery County. It really is a unique location for so many reasons I hope that we can get into. For us, it really was, it just made a lot of sense. So, when we started Cartesian back in 2016, we were a week out from our sale of our previous company, which we had built from concept to registration clinical trials with just the 2 of us. So we did everything virtually. And my partner was in Boston. I had moved down here, and we thought, well, why don't we go ahead and do Cartesian, the current company, in that sort of virtual way as well. When we recognized that cell and gene therapy is very unique and requires a meaningful footprint and requires us to sort of optimize our manufacturing operations and clinical operations really in-house, because it's really the sort of the Wild West with cell and gene therapy, right? I mean, we're pioneering cutting-edge therapies every day within this field. You really sort of need to sort of spearhead that development effort in-house. So when we recognized that we had to, have a meaningful footprint, we were fortunate enough to meet some folks at Shear Partners that sort of guided us to, correct lab space, and that's where we actually met Matt Brady back then. And we recognized very quickly that the infrastructure was here already, that allowed us to be able to move into some meaningful lab space that we then converted into GMP manufacturing suites. And we had a significant amount of support from the county and sort of the infrastructure that allowed us to be able to do that effectively. So the direct answer to your question, Stacy, is that, what attracted us to the county as opposed to other places, because the infrastructure was there. What keeps us is the fact that the support is here, and the level of interest is here. And of course, we have now the ability to draw on a significant amount of talent from this area, specifically within cell and gene therapy. So we're currently in Gaithersburg, and have just nearly doubled our footprint here at the same building, 704 Quince Orchard. And that sort of investment in real estate, I think, helps us sort of position ourselves to be able to continue developing some pretty cool cell and gene therapies as we advance in clinical trials across multiple disease categories.
Thanks, Murat. And Anthony?
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you also everyone for joining today. My background is I came down to the area in about 2000 to get my PhD at Hopkins. There I started working in the RNA therapeutic space. Both Murat and I's company work on RNA therapeutics, and I think this area is particularly rich in RNA and gene therapy, especially on the RNA side. We had a working group a few weeks ago, and I think half the companies there were working on RNA therapies. Left Hopkins to join a large consortia at the National Institutes of Health to get my postdoc, and became a scientist there for a number of years. And the technology that became my company today, Miracule, was developed there. And it's a way to analyze genomics from patients to identify new drug targets that you can target with an RNA therapeutic. And the advantage there is when we study patients' genomics, we know that that drug is matched up to those patients. It's going to have a good effect for those patients, rather than often today, patient goes in the doctor's office, they can correctly diagnose you with the disease, but they really don't know which drug of a number of drugs might work for that patient. And that's something that cell and gene therapy can really solve, because those therapies are based on the natural genes, the natural cellular phenotypes in our body to treat those diseases. So after we invented the technology at NIH, we were ready to set up the company. And we, as we started an early company, as always, you don't have a lot of resources. We were still collaborating closely with NIH under CRADA. And I think if you look at the early companies in this space, many of them come out of NIH. Murat's and my technology both were licensed initially from National Institutes of Health. So we set up a CRADA. We were looking for space in Bethesda near NIH. We couldn't find that. We ended up finding lab space from another pharmaceutical company, Nexamune. Some of you may have heard of, went public, great story in the area. We lived in their basement for 3 years. And then after, slowly building up the technology, they let us out of the basement. Matt helped us find a new space at 704 Quince Orchard. We're both, Murat and I, similar, to Murat's story. As we got traction, we got private investment funding. We also got grants from NIH. We were able to build out in that newly renovated space, a 3,000 square foot lab, an adjacent office, and that's, I think, going to accommodate us for the next several years as we continue to grow the company. We have our first therapeutic hopefully going into the clinic in about a year, and then 2 or 3 right behind that as we grow the company. So we, I coming down and working closely with NIH, it was a no-brainer. We wanted to be here in the county, stay here, also for family reasons, and being associated with the area. I like working here, and I want to continue to see the space grow. But as we, continue to raise money, continue to grow the company, I think the county still offers many advantages as far as having good talent sources, both from the academic side and the other big companies that are here. We've been successful in recruiting some of our staff from NIH and from Hopkins, but then also from some of the other big companies where we get experienced staff coming in and helping us continue to grow and leverage that talent. So, I really see a lot of assets, as Brad said, both from the academic and the government side and from a robust, private market to be a great location to keep growing and expanding companies in this space. And hopefully we can continue to be a competitive market. I think we will be competitive and growing market as we continue to evolve.
Thanks, Anthony. And I guess drawing upon that, I think it's evident to all of us that as the market continues to constrict for hotel and office growth and use, the biotech and life sciences market has become even hotter in terms of capital attractions. But it seems like as prices are going up, especially for the office products that are ripe for conversion, there seems to be this rub that not all have the experience to implement those conversions. You all sound like you work with Shear Partners, you had other partners that had a lot of expertise to deliver your spaces in a quick manner, which seems to be very important to this market. And what advice would you give to landowners, investors, and developers who are looking to develop or repurpose their existing assets for the biotech market? And I guess, why don't we start with you, Matt, on that?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you having me here this morning. So advice, I would say probably know what you're getting into. This isn't from a technical standpoint. I think a lot of people feel like they can check the initial boxes of the structural elements of a building, clear heights and floor loads, and they've got everything they need for a lab conversion. But the reality is it's a lot more complex than that. And so having the experience of going through either a conversion or ground up development and being able to implement all those years of experience into a finished product is really kind of an art and an expertise that's unique in the market. And so find good partners, I guess, is the advice there. The other piece is to understand that the tenants that you'll be dealing with don't have a typical balance sheet like most landlords are accustomed to seeing. And so most landlords are accustomed to seeing a balance sheet where a company has revenues and profitable, and that's just not the case with a lot of growing life science companies that are funded by venture capital and operate on a burn rate as opposed to revenues. And there's always exceptions to that, but just understanding that the securitization of these types of companies is a very different equation than most landlords and developers are accustomed to. So,
Brad, anything else you would add on that in that regard?
I think Matt hit the most important point. You have to really find the right partners. These are, even a so-called simple lab conversion is not simple. These are very complex buildings that can get stunningly complex depending on what the occupants want to do with them. So there are large capital requirements to invest in these types of buildings. And one of the challenges I think we face now, and probably always, is there's so much growth going on in the life sciences industry right now that most of those professionals that can help with that are already stretched beyond their limits. So, are they available, and can you find the right partners to help you think through these decisions and to be able to help you with them? And so Matt alluded to something else too. There are buildings that may on the surface seem like they're doable. They meet sort of the minimum requirements. And then it's the next level of requirements that are problematic. How many sources of power do these buildings have access to? Where are their loading docks? Are the loading docks set up in a way where they'll accommodate the type of uses that people might want to use? And so it gets to be pretty complex pretty quickly, which is why it's critical to talk to the right people to help with that.
Matt, back to you for one moment. In terms of, just again, for those that are listening, in terms of investment costs for converting office space to lab space, I'm sure it's different for each building, but can you just give us a sense of scale of what that looks like?
Sure. Well, it's a moving target right now, considering everything that's happening in supply chain and labor issues. I would say if you're just converting a typical office building, that investment can be anywhere from $60 to $100 per square foot just in the base building infrastructure costs. And then on top of that, the market is demanding somewhere in the $125 to $150 a foot range for tenant improvements to the tenants. Another way to look at that would be to build speculative lab spaces, in which case right now we're somewhere around $175, $180 a foot to build spec lab and office. So just rough numbers.
Thank you. So Anthony and Murat, you have kind of evidenced this in terms of where you both are located, but the life sciences market has this nuclearization in the Great Seneca Life Sciences Corridor. And I've got to give Anthony props for my use of the word nuclearization. I keep trying to put that into any sentence I have these days. But as we know, this area isn't blessed with transit or an urban environment, but what it may lack in the TOD experience, we are hearing, and we see certainly with how the companies have located, we have in the grouping of life sciences companies, and then access, of course, to the ICC and 495 and talent from Baltimore and Frederick. So I'm interested in kind of from all of you is what continues to attract companies to these areas? And kind of on the flip side, as we have new markets opening up in the sense of redevelopments and master plans with Silver Spring coming online, we have some incentives coming with White Flint, which I'd like to talk a little bit more about, and of course Bethesda, is what would attract you to move to markets that are outside of the Gaithersburg Great Seneca Life Sciences Corridor area? And why don't I start with you, Murat?
Sure. Yeah. So we're located in Gaithersburg, and we find that the talent we're able to attract not only draws from the local area, but also from Frederick, from Baltimore, down from Silver Spring, from Bethesda, as well as from Virginia, and in fact DC. We do have some folks that commute directly from DC. These are long drives, and I think it is a significant percentage of the day, and we're in a type of business where we have to have everybody come in every day, right? The notion of working remotely when you're doing, cell and gene therapy and manufacturing product here for clinical trials, you just can't do that from home. So, but people do it, and I think people are sort of, used to that just by virtue of residing in the greater sort of DC area. The lack of meaningful public transportation certainly requires folks to have to deal with that long commute. But just sort of given the reality, people make do. It's sort of what the expectation is. If you're in the middle of Boston, reality is different. You can walk from one end of the city to the other, and you got a great T system. But even there, it's the sort of as life sciences companies are sort of spreading beyond into the suburbs, you're sort of beginning to deal with the kind of traffic that we've dealt with for some time. So, look, ultimately, it's not that easy to move once you make a decision as to where your headquarters are going to be, right? And so, often what ends up happening is you have a certain niche, a certain sort of geography at which a certain number of anchor companies that end up being successful are established, and then you've got a significant amount of activity that sort of happens. And, in our case, it's the 270 corridor in general, and certain locations in Rockville and Gaithersburg in particular. And we've certainly, when we established our company, I live in Silver Spring, so, I actually looked at Silver Spring as the first option and just didn't find anything that was, doable in terms of lab space and GMP manufacturing relative to coming up to Gaithersburg, which is where we've been over the last 5 years.
Anthony, you and I were talking a little bit about your company and as you grow and potentially get into that Series A phase is, the concept of how to move into a Bethesda or potentially a Silver Spring area, where, as you talked about, kind of the amenities that are offered and a way in which to attract talent. And can you talk a little bit from that perspective of what it would take for you financially, or, getting other companies or things that government would do or NIH could do to try to attract people to some of these more urban areas, companies to these more urban areas?
Yeah, no, that's thank you, Stacey, for that question. I think, when a company first gets started, it needs support around it. It doesn't have the resources. And so if it's an academic spin out, they're going to want to be situated near their academic lab, because they're still collaborating with the investigators. They may be doing animal experiments. We actually still do collaborative experiments 5 years later with our original lab we spun out of. And so for startups coming out of NIH, if there was a support network down there in Bethesda, I think that would make a rich environment, help more and more companies spin out of NIH and make it easier for them to gain traction. For us, we wanted to do that initially. We found a support network with a larger company up in Gaithersburg, right? And then once we got started there, we kind of kept working there. And I think that Gaithersburg ecosystem started around, the culture at MedImmune and Human Genome Sciences, which both got acquired by huge pharma companies, but they both supported their people, scientists and business development folks that work there. As they learn and grow, they were supported by their company to go out and do the next thing. Verily, incubated inside MedImmune. We all know the success that's been in the last couple of years. Novavax was a spin out from MedImmune, right? And now they're a company up there in Gaithersburg. And so that's kind of how these things work, is you have a successful company, people learn how to make startups and get interested in business, and then they build companies around them, or an academic institution, supporting those. As a company evolves, and now I'm coming back to your question, not mine. As a company evolves, gets more traction, starts to be able to kind of stand on its own 2 feet, comes through, Series A or a Series B, where maybe the company is worth hundreds of millions of dollars at that point. If they're a biotech company and they have a product in the clinic and they're, really starting to expand, 100 people, it's not only the company itself, but the location it's in, it helps its growth. And there's certain, as Murat said, Gaithersburg is away from that transit network. People have to commute from all these locations. A location like Bethesda is more centralized, or Twin Brook, it's on the, it's on public transit. There's a city feel, there's, when investors and partners are looking to see the company grow there, they can see that vision maybe in a location like that a little better necessarily than a more suburban or rural location like Gaithersburg versus Bethesda. And so for us, I'm biased coming out of NIH, loving Bethesda. I spent, 7 years working at NIH. I would love to see our company have the resources and have a nucleation site down there. I think that would be a huge advantage to the region, and also give larger, later stage companies a competitive advantage to be in that sort of environment.
Brad, in terms of your experience kind of with many different companies and Montgomery County in general, what are your thoughts in terms of kind of creating various different nodes and the ability to potentially get, the attraction to some of the more urban areas?
I think one of the challenges is that where you see these communities be most successful, life sciences communities, is that there's a density of people and density of companies, and the ability for those companies to interact with each other. And it's not even formally, typically, it's just the casual relationships people make at lunch or dinner, or running into people after work and those sorts of things. So I think there is some huge benefit to increasing the density of life sciences companies in that greater Seneca life sciences corridor, because it would help to continue to build the density of our infrastructure here. With that being said, there's only so much space available, and that's one of the challenges we always face here in Montgomery County, is there's a limited number of places where you can build. So we've seen that United Therapeutics has a massive presence in Silver Spring. there aren't really other players than that right now in that area, but in the future, maybe that's an area that some people will start to develop. As Anthony mentioned, in Twin Brook, there's some redevelopment going on there. We have the U.S. Pharmacopoeia there. There were already a few labs there for other purposes, which are being converted, redeveloped now. There's an incubator in life sciences there with a few tenants. And there are 2 former NIH labs that are pretty large that are getting converted. So I think just because the sort of immediate and growing demand for life sciences, people will start to find some of these other centers and fill in there.
I guess drawing upon that, as you know, the county executives and others, including yourselves, are promoting White Flint as another geographic area for life sciences companies to cluster. But it's it looks so good on paper in the sense that it's on transit, but there's challenges with it. And I'm sure part of the challenge is that speed to market, I presume, is one of the biggest challenges. But Matt, I was interested in your thought in terms of White Flint. What could help make that happen? What do you think are some of the hurdles to overcome to make White Flint another potential hub or an expansion of the existing hub?
Yeah, well, before I touch on that, I just want to mention, I think it's important to understand that with this type of real estate that's very functionally driven, as Murat mentioned, you can't do this at home. And so this is very functionally driven. And so as the market has evolved, the first step was solve for the functionality. And really the only places you could do that were in 1- and 2-story flex type options or some purpose built type buildings in the suburbs. And it was just where it was clustered. You have a very finite pool of landlords and developers that were providing that type of space. And so first we were solving for the functionality. As the market has grown and evolved, now we're moving where the functionality is a given in a lot of cases, as long as you have that good advisory team, as we talked about. And as the traditional lab hubs get built out and filled up, it's diversifying. And so now we're moving into, I think, the next inflection point in the market, which is the functionality is at some level a given, and now you can diversify not only in location, but you can also diversify in the type of space, amenities, aesthetics of the building. And so now I think it's actually an interesting point in Maryland's growth where we're able to compete with a lot of the more urban clusters in the country and in the world, where you have urban options, where things are moving in that direction. So it's an exciting time where now you have a diversity of developers too, that are offering different types of buildings, both from a functionality standpoint and an amenity standpoint. So, and then just to get back to your question about White Flint, I really think it's something where the government starts it and really has a hand in kind of the idea and the concept, and maybe they can help with some of the zoning, permitting, et cetera. But it's really the private markets and investors that drive it. And so right now you have some very savvy groups that are getting into that market. Federal Realty is one that's exciting right now. They have Pike and Rose, which is a vibrant urban area that they're putting up a 260,000 square foot lab building. And getting back to my previous point, that's designed by Gensler. Gensler is one of the top architects in the country in terms of just like prestige and finish level. And so it's a whole different offering than the market's seen previously. So I think the private market really jumping in there and recognizing White Flint as a life science cluster, and then developing the buildings that can accommodate the functionalities, I think that's a big step.
So I guess that kind of leads into what folks have been talking about. Brad, you referenced that Montgomery County ranks 4th as a top tier biopharma cluster behind Boston and Cambridge and San Francisco and New York, New Jersey, and of course, North Carolina has a huge market share. So as San Diego and Philadelphia appear to be inching their way upward, what do you think it will take for our region, and particularly Montgomery County, to retain and grow biotech companies? and wanted to also draw upon Matt's point in terms of zoning and regulations and how government potentially can get out of their way. And just to add one other part is, as many may know, that Councilmember Friedson has kind of begun to look at that. He has a pending text amendment right now that would potentially provide some incentives and zoning benefits for some larger companies in the area. And I would be interested to hear what would be helpful for the government to do from a regulatory perspective to basically, again, continue to grow the market. And why don't we start with you, Brad?
Sure, Stacy. So it's interesting, within the last 2 weeks, 2 different organizations have produced studies about the economy here in Montgomery County. One of them was the Maryland Tech Council. They commissioned the Milken Institute to look at the life sciences industry in Maryland. And then this week, actually, the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation released their economic advisory group's report, EAP report, on what needs to be done to help the economy here in Montgomery County. In life sciences, everyone was consistent. There are 3 things that really need to help change here for us to be successful. And all of those really relate to speed to market and the ability to survive and succeed here. Really, it's addressing workforce. The companies that are here in life sciences desperately need more people and pay them incredibly well. And so how do we, get the workforce here to help with that? It's access to facilities, whether there are new custom-built facilities, existing facilities, incubators, or other things like that. People really need physical spaces where they can grow and succeed. And then additionally, how do we build an entrepreneurial ecosystem to help people succeed, whether it's through funding, connections, and other things like that. And so, I think Councilmember Friedson's zoning text amendment is a great start, because we really do have to get people in the door here, or the people who are here, to keep them here. We've got to speed the process up. When you look at states like North Carolina, who spent the last decade deciding that they want to compete and win in life sciences, they are doing so. So is Massachusetts. But that's a decade of concerted effort to work on these things and be able to get buildings up out of the ground as quickly as possible, and let those companies start serving patients as quickly as possible.
Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
I can't really comment on the zoning text amendment. I'm not privy to all the details of it yet, but I think the point that I'd like to resonate with Brad is recruiting and retention. That idea of how do you draw people in, understanding that this isn't a local hiring market. When you talk to a lot of the staffing folks and headhunters and the like in the scientific industry, most of the folks that are moving from one job to another, there's no real people out there with resumes saying, hey, I need a job, in the scientific industry. You're really in a very, very constrained hiring market right now. And I'd love to hear Murat and Anthony talk about this a little bit as they've tried to hire. But recruiting and retention, not only on a local level, but on a national level. How do we compete on a national level and have something that can draw in from those other scientific hubs, I think is really important. How do we measure up against those hubs in terms of living standards, in terms of our offerings for facilities that they can come to work in? I think that's a major distinguishing feature of this area. I would argue that talent, and where I stand on facilities, but I would argue talent is 100% much greater concern than the facilities. And so solving for that first, and then as a byproduct, having the facility is a place where they can go and work and be proud of it, I think is kind of a nice to have after that.
Murat, can you comment a bit in terms of kind of your perspective?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. It's when we talk about this, as Brad alluded to, this sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem, both in the context of talent as well as in real estate, there's a certain mindset that exists in life sciences that I think bifurcates into 2 categories. The first is what we sort of typically think of when we say life sciences, and that's really represented by big companies, right? AstraZeneca, Pfizer's and Novartis's of the world, which can pay lavish sums to their workforce and build, sparkling brand new buildings into hundreds of thousands or millions of square feet. And they have, product that is commercial that has undergone a very rigorous set of, a culling within a very sort of concerted effort to develop a pipeline from discovery all the way to commercial. Those are the successes, but I would argue that the majority of innovation that occurs in the world, in particular in the US, is not within that category, but rather the smaller entrepreneurial community of which Anthony and I are a part of. And the mindset that is required to support that category is vastly different. You really have to be incredibly risk tolerant. So for example, from a talent perspective, we have folks that pack up their bags and come to work at Cartesian from Europe and, California and Northeast and the South. And, these folks are coming in fully cognizant of the fact that the job, it's not a job. It's not even a career. It's a mission that they're coming here for. And there's a real probability that it's not going to work out. And so if it doesn't, they want to know that the ecosystem allows them to be able to go to a different company. So if we were to try to build this out in the middle of Kansas with being the only company out here, it'd be very difficult for us to recruit talent from all over the world. And so similarly, from a sort of a land development perspective, I think folks have to realize the fact that, as Matt alluded to before, our balance sheets are wildly off relative to your sort of common office space. I mean, we're talking about high risk capital from, venture capital and private equity. Cartesian won't be generating revenue for many years, right? It's all on the cost side. And so you sort of have to recognize that you're making a bet on individual companies long-term at a level that you really haven't before if you're coming into this game as a sort of a developer, right? And, we're talking about an industry where of the study of the drugs that get into clinical trials, 6% of them, if they're cancer drugs, make it commercial, and only 15% overall make it commercial. So, very high risk, high reward type of business. And so from just a sort of a mindset perspective, everyone who's sort of associated with it, from our colleagues on the talent side, from the developer side, people have to sort of understand that when we say, this entrepreneurial ecosystem, this is, it's quite different relative to not only sort of the industry as a whole, but the big pharma in particular.
Anthony, want to add to that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Murat, for those comments. I really do echo a lot of what he says from a risk perspective, from kind of a mission or need. I mean, that's true in the life sciences. I feel like it's true in kind of all good startups, is that they're mission driven, they're vision driven, not yet profit driven. They become, if you successfully accomplish your mission and the vision for the company, profit come with that, right? And there's I know it's a fun ride. That's why we do it. And the staff we hire, the staff we recruit, they obviously, everybody needs a paycheck to live, but most of them want to be part of that and see that in the company. And I can say, when recruiting people from out of the area, it is a challenge to recruit from Boston and San Diego or San Francisco. I interview people regularly. They love the company, but they say, when it kind of comes down to, am I going to take a pay cut to move across the country out of that market? It's often not, the math comes back into their mind, and so that's kind of always a challenge. But on the flip side, we have a lot of luck recruiting from Philadelphia, Research Triangle Park, where you have maybe experienced people coming, and we get to play the other end of that, where it's a little bit of a step up. And I think having a compelling mission that you can sell to investors, share with them, sell to employees, it's the same, and that's how you drive people into the area. And I think that's your top echelon employees, but actually most of your employees, your mid-level employees, may not come in with that kind of experience, right? And you're drawing those from the academic environment, and having a robust, a training sector for research technicians that do a lot of the bull work. You need to be competent, need to have good experience, maybe done an internship with the company before coming in. Early stage career scientists, that's what really helped drive the company forward. And so this area has a plethora of that already. And it's about, kind of building relationships between the early stage companies and those institutions. I'm lucky that I come from NIH and from Hopkins, so I have a network at those two locations, which make it easier for us to draw talent from them. I feel like I hate you. Another part of your question that I'm forgetting beyond the talent piece.
You know what, and actually, I do have a follow-up question for you all, but I wanted to just remind folks that if you do have any questions, we're going to turn to your questions in a moment. So please feel free to add them to the chat. But really drawing upon what you all are saying, it's evident that capital, a need for early capital, is so important. And there's been some suggestions that the government, Matt, you mentioned University of Pennsylvania and others have begun to provide economic grants to companies, and that there's some advantage because there's potentially a high return on investment. Do you think that this would help grow the biotech industry to have these types of incentives, either from private institutions or from the government? And why don't I start with you, Murat?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, look, capital is obviously the lifeblood of any business, and that's as true for life sciences as it is for any other industry. But in particular, in life sciences, it's high risk capital, just based on the statistics we talked about. And it always obviously helps to have some non-dilutive capital in the form of grants, whether they're county grants, state grants, or federal grants. We've been fortunate that to have drawn $7+ million in grant funding from the NIH alone. We have a stem cell research grant from the state, and we have had some funding provided by the county as well, in terms of some for on the lease side, on the real estate side. So that always helps. There's no question, and I think it'd be quite hard for a company to sort of get started without having some access to that level of support.
Matt, from your perspective on the real estate side, there are companies out there, we've talked about Boston Properties, South Duval, and others that are active in this market. Would this type of grants, actually to the developer or owner, be helpful as it relates obviously to specific biotech companies to have vision, for example, in White Flint or other areas to grow these hubs, I guess, a little bit further?
Yeah, I don't. I think if you look at it in aggregate, what the government would be able to provide would be a drop in the bucket as compared to venture capital and other sources of capital. I think we have some local Maryland groups. TEDCO comes to mind. There's a few groups that kind of already make these investments. Certainly, you have NIH with a robust grant and funding program that comes out of there. The issue, I guess, with the NIH is there's no real reason to hold anyone close by the NIH with their funding program. They spread it all over the country. As a matter of fact, Johns Hopkins is year after year after year the #1 recipient of NIH funding, and it's interesting that they really localize in Baltimore, and not around the NIH's campus. And so, yeah, I think there's some element of help that the government could bring for that. I think the government might play a role in other ways. One of the issues that we bump up against is securitization. And so an interesting concept that I've been trying to socialize is this idea of the government providing some sort of a backstop to leases for new life science investors who are nervous about getting into the space with that kind of a balance sheet with their tenants. If the government could step in and kind of backstop those, I think it could be an interesting program that could alleviate some of the risk from the investors and the tenants alike, and help to grow both of those simultaneously.
Thanks, Matt. So I think I'll pause for a moment, and we do have some questions from folks that are here. We have something from one of our planners, Elza Heisen-McCoy. Welcome, Elza. One of the questions is what is a standard range for urban lab building footprints? And I guess I'll just tag on the next question, which may be somewhat related, is what kind of lease security arrangements do biotech tenants provide to landlords? So why don't we start with the first one about the standard range for urban lab building footprints, which is probably a question for you, Matt and Brad.
So I'll say that if you study other markets and what's working in, let's say, Boston, Cambridge, and kind of best practices for lab design for new buildings, one of the things that comes up is the bigger the footprint, the more you can communicate on that floor, and as you change floors, there's some issue potentially with communication and efficiency of the layout. And so that would beg for a bigger footprint. I think you can kind of hit a ceiling with that, probably right around 40,000 feet, unless it's a very functional requirement like a manufacturing facility or the like. But I think for basic R&D lab space, somewhere in the 28 to 35,000 square foot range seems to be the sweet spot.
Brad, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, Stacy, I would add to that. So if you look at, if you just think of these buildings vertically, most of these tend to be very low buildings. If you're talking about a manufacturing building, they tend to be one story with a mezzanine, so they require a much better physical footprint. I think realistically in Montgomery County, we're more and more challenged to find spaces where we can build buildings like that, even though they're in very high demand. When you're looking at building office buildings, even if they're custom buildings in the life sciences space, 6 stories is really pushing the limit of what you typically can get in there and have these be efficient. You have to realize there's a lot of infrastructure inside those buildings to support the labs and other things like that, and it becomes increasingly hard to fit all the mechanicals and everything else within a building much larger than that. I think from a cost perspective, people would prefer not to go even that high, because it gets to be cost prohibitive or cost challenging.
That's interesting. Matt, one of the next question someone asked was about the lease security arrangements. So what kind of lease security arrangements do biotech tenants provide to landlords?
So this is a hotly contested issue, and the reason is, as we've talked about, these companies are venture funded, and the best use of that capital, generally speaking, is for operations, not for capital investment in a space or for a security deposit that'll just sit in a bank account somewhere. They want to employ those funds into new hiring, top talent, equipment, clinical trials. And so landlords, on the other hand, are trying to defer risk as much as possible. And they think the way to do that is by securitizing through a security deposit. And you're taxing someone right at the same point where they need the money the most. And so that's a real challenge for new developers and investors in the space. I would say the industry standard right now is about 3 months of security. And so, you know, that's kind of been established loosely by Alexander Real Estate Equities in the market. And the reason I mention them is because that's a chartered group that understands lab space and understands the risk associated with it. But beyond that, they've made it their mission to build it. And so they see great residual value from generation to generation to generation of tenant through that same lab space. And so they're not as worried on the front end with the company that occupies it, because they know there's value in the improvements throughout the life of that space. And so well-designed lab space, I mean, one of the original lab buildings in the market is 19 First Field Road, and it's on its 6th generation of lab tenant with the same casework and arguably the same layout in the building. And so, you know, that just shows you that there's great residual value and durability to these improvements. So long answer to what was kind of a short question, but I would say 3 months is the generally accepted market right now. And it's probably, you know, understanding and making that binary decision that we're going to be a lab landlord here, and not having the what if this doesn't work out, we'll go back to whatever this building was before mentality, you know, burn the boats kind of mentality.
Thanks, Matt. That was very helpful. There's a question for you, Anthony and Murat, in terms of potential, the issue of talent and attraction of talent, and particular thoughts on partnerships with Montgomery College to recruit mid-level talent or other institutions in the area. So maybe start with you, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, when we recruit from college, just kind of like places like, we don't have staff that's come directly from Montgomery College yet, so I can't comment specifically on that program. But one of the really beneficial things, we've had interns from Hopkins and from NIH, even high school at one point. And that really gets, that gives the opportunity for both the company and the employee to kind of test out, potential employee, test out if there's a fit there, if they have the right skills to move in. And so those kind of programs are really valuable. If the program has to give a training that matches what the company needs as far as learning the kind of precise and technical abilities, which are most important for an early stage technician or scientist that joins the company. And I think the vast majority of people that get hired probably come through those sorts of internship programs. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Murat, what's your experience been? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Look, I mean, the suggested in the question is this stickiness between these types of, you know, academic private partnerships around life sciences in general and biotech in particular. And so the benefits there are vast and sort of creates more of the glue that you know, binds the disparate parts that need to come together in order to build the kind of ecosystem that is the entrepreneurial and risk-taking, et cetera. And so that there have to be these sort of local suppliers of talent pools, so to speak, right? And certainly Montgomery College is as good of an example as any within the county. And so, yeah, no, absolutely. I think you know, as we and others get to know more about the kinds of training and the kind of talent that comes out of these institutions, and you know, there's more comfort that's created, more hiring, and then of course hiring begets more hiring, and in the long run, that's exactly what you need in order to create this kind of risk-taking environment.
Thanks, Murat. Brad, anything you would add to that?
I think they're both Montgomery College and the universities at Shady Grove have been great partners. We work with them constantly to try and help them understand what the companies need out there. They do a great job of doing that themselves, and working back and forth. The challenge, I think, is twofold. One, it's how do we get more people interested in moving into the life sciences industry? Because most people, if they're in high school or even college, don't know of it or don't know people in life sciences. And two, how do we make sure that those institutions learn from the employers about the skill sets that are necessary? A lot of times the academic degrees that people can get, even if they're life sciences related, aren't directly applicable to working in a manufacturing facility or working in Marat's CGMP facility to produce cell therapies that are going into humans to save their lives. So I think we want to continue to try and close those gaps and have a productive dialogue, which we're doing a good job of so far.
Well, we're coming upon the 10 o'clock time frame, and we all want to be respectful of everyone's time, but this has been such an amazing conversation. You each have brought your own unique perspective, and collectively discussion about this is really what we were hoping for. So we thank you all very much, and we thank those that have come to listen today. This really is just the beginning of the discussion. As we were thinking through our various questions, we realized that this could be 2 panels worth of discussion. So please feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments regarding any of these topics or development in Montgomery County. And again, as mentioned, we will be following up later today with a recording of this event and any additional information on this topic. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Brad, Matt, Murat, Anthony, for being with us today and the planning that went into this. And hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.